All right, let's go ahead and get started. People might straggle in. I know the Bennetts are here, so they'll come back.
They're floating.
Yeah, they're helping people come in, so that's kind of more important than class today. Okay, so tell me who doesn't have a book, but who wants a book?
Me.
All right, everybody else okay? Okay, so that's one. I think what I'm going to do this week, Penny, is I'm going to try to just find a couple myself and bring them next Sunday.
Okay.
It doesn't help you for next Sunday. So,
I'll scan the next chapter if
Okay.
anybody wants it.
okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
It's me.
I'll send it to you. You got the first chapter, right?
Yeah, well, and I was gonna say, when I ordered from Amazon, it took about a week for it to show up.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, Penny.
Oh,
I just
actually,
didn't have
I
time to do that
downloaded
this
onto my
week, so.
tablet, and I went, oh, this one's too old, they haven't got it.
You're actually ordering a book. I think deliveries have been a little messed up the last couple of weeks. You know, we've been snow and ice everywhere.
Yeah,
Here, you guys be my readers while I have the PowerPoint. So when I say page number, you go to it and help me out. How about that? So this is chapter 2, and Elbert Dempsey is an interesting man. I think he's kind of brilliant. The more, now that I've read chapter 2, because what he has done in these chapters is that he has condensed a PhD knowledge into a chapter, so it was kind of incredible for me that, we've dabbled in some of these studies in this class, but we have not gone as deep as this guy has gone. So I'm going to try really hard to weave in what I understand of what he's saying as we go. But if you guys want a history of religion, there's a lot of different books out there. We actually studied that book, History of God, and that's what I'm kind of referring to in my own memory more than anything else. So
it took me over a year.
You
to read
know,
that book.
yeah, that thing was complicated. We actually had complaints about that one.
Well, and if I had been her editor, I would have said, we have got to divide this up into more chapters.
Yeah. Well, and we eventually started having, 2 classes for one chapter, so that was better.
People could read and kind of go, okay, I'll go.
Yeah,
Before you-
yeah, we
It was very.
were
hard to
killing the teachers and everything else. But
I understand that was, I read it all by myself and I thought it was hard to digest.
well, I bring it up because this chapter in particular is telling us about, when we look at when we're looking at the Old Testament, what Dempsey says and what many other authors say, and this is something that each of us can decide for ourselves, is that the wisdom writers were already, they were all swirling around the Middle East together. And so remember, it was mostly oral teachings back then. And so what we are looking at in terms of wisdom writing, and we start with Proverbs as kind of a prime example, many of these were already in society, and they were just written down by, Dempsey calls them the Israelites, which he keeps talking about in his chapter. So our Jewish writers in the Old Testament were writing down, they weren't necessarily original. So that's or new.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could have been a mixture.
Yeah. So what he's saying though, and it goes way back, you guys remember in grade school learning about the Sumerians? I remember learning about Sumeria way back when, because that's kind of that original culture that started writing things down, that figured out how to have city-states, that figured out how to make clay pots and all of the stuff that's the original civilization kind of a thing. It all started there. Exactly, draining swamps. So when we're talking about wisdom writers, we're talking all the way back to the beginning of these people who are learning how to create more coherent thought. So these guys are saying they're assuming cause and effect to what they're seeing around them. It's not all mystical. They were teaching how to succeed at life based on experience, observations of nature and everyday life. And we'll talk about that later because their observations were a little bit skewed. Remember, the world is flat kind of people, you know. And so these same ideas were used in every culture in the ancient Near East. So that's our background for learning what the wisdom writers of the Old Testament are talking about. So what Dempsey talks about is that it started, way back in 3000 BC, and a lot of the wisdom writers were not religious at all, but religion was influenced by them, and especially the Old Testament, because the Israelite religion was the one that found wisdom learning most compatible. So when you look at the Old Testament, and you've got all of these proverbs in there, that's wisdom writing. And then they put the rational God, they put this God force over the top of their wisdom writing. So that's the development of the wisdom writers. But here's the dude.
How did he write without arms? Had a scribe.
His name is, I don't know. That word right there.
I want to say Ptah.
Ptah 2450. Oh, you guys can't read. Can you read that little tiny thing up there? So what I looked for is, and I found just one because I'm not going to go through all the proverbs, guys. I'm not going to do it. But so what's happening here is this is that first impact of sage wisdom writing. Was this guy? He was a vizier. I'm thinking emperor. Is that what vizier means? Anybody?
He's probably an advisor to Pharaoh.
Oh, well, that makes more sense. So on the left is what he wrote. If you are a well-to-do man and beget a son who pleases God, kind of not a complete sentence, but well. And then the Proverbs 22:6 is train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. So what they're doing is they're just showing us that this development of the wisdom writings, so it really started with this guy long before the Old Testament. And so you got to think about kind of these wisdom sayings that are just swirling around all these communities. And then the Old Testament writers write it down in Proverbs. So then we've also got our famous 10 Commandments. And what Dempsey talks about is that the first 4 are more like traditional religious, thou shalt have no other gods, blah, 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 that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But the last 6 are borrowed from the Code of Hammurabi. And this is actually, I remember learning this in law school. This is actually the earliest criminal laws written in the world, and so what we see then in the last 6 10 commandments, like thou shalt not kill kind of stuff, that's taken from Hammurabi, who also took it from this other even older code, and that goes back to Samaria again. And so this one is the laws of, they spelled it different ways, Eshuana. I did not know how to spell or pronounce that one. But this is one more example of the Old Testament is it's I look at it as layering, I mean, all of these codes and all of these, wisdom sayings are swirling around these communities in the Middle East, and you got to think about, grandma says it to grandchild, or who knows how it gets passed around, but it's swirling around. And so each community then kind of develops their own code. So that's what the Old Testament is doing, but it doesn't originate, in that Bible, which I think is a surprise to some. But now that I think about it, it's like it makes more sense to me that that's going to come from an oral tradition, and all of the communities are kind of doing that together. So when we look at the famous, somebody remind me, Leviticus 24:19 through 20, isn't that the one? It's page 37, people who have my book. Somebody remind me what that one is.
Hammurabi had a lot of
24:19.
punishments for crimes.
Exactly.
And in the Ten Commandments don't necessarily list a punishment, they just say.
Is
"Don't
that the
do
eye for, is that the eye for the eye one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Fracture for fracture, eye for eye.
There you go. Eye for eye. So you're right. Most of the time, you're right, Sharon. Most of the time
Don't
that
do that.
exactly. But when you think about the famous eye for an eye,
Mhm.
which I'm sorry, I had a friend tell me recently that we should still do that, you know, you know.
You're like,
So, so that actually was the tradition from the Code of Hammurabi, which, you know, you think about even countries today, that's what they, you know, you look at somebody else's wife, you're getting your eye poked out,
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it is
Mhm.
that harsh. And that's, in fact, Dempsey talks about how, you know, Jesus addresses this later too, because Jesus was the one that came in and said, all right, now we gotta figure out how to turn the other cheek type of thing,
mhm.
you
Well,
know.
who in more modern times said an eye for an eye will leave the world
The
blind.
whole world blind.
Yeah.
Did Gandhi say that? I know, I
I
know.
thought
Yeah, that's
so.
a Gandhi.
Yeah, I think that was Gandhi.
But,
Tooth for a tooth, and
Yeah.
before long, the
and then
world is toothless and
Tevye
blind.
said, yes.
It's
So
kind of the same sentiment as the golden rule.
Yeah. Yeah.
it is, which is also in Judaic writings, by the way, you know,
I thought it was kind of interesting that he mentioned that the Code of Hammurabi had sort of a class structure built into it.
Yeah.
yes.
Oh,
So, you know, depending
Yes.
on how wealthy you were, also dictated the
Punishment was
punishment.
harder.
Right.
Yeah, and with the you know, with the law of Moses, it was more kind of on all levels.
Yes.
The same.
Yes, equanimity kind of a
I
thing.
mean, people would say today that if you're wealthy, you have a better chance of getting
Yeah.
off of a charge or something than
Yeah,
Yeah. it's backward.
somebody
Yeah.
that's not, doesn't have means.
yeah.
That's true.
So this is, you know, once again, this is that development in these communities of what is it, you know, it's ethical and moral principles. And what's that pyramid that Greg Stillsummer used to talk about all the time that, you know, I mean, sometimes,
Maslow's pyramid,
yeah,
Maslow's hierarchy.
yeah,
Maslow's hierarchy.
Yeah, so you have to have your basic needs met before you can think about higher needs like
yeah,
self-awareness or,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
finding meaning to life or something like that. You need food first before you can worry about
Well,
finding meaning.
and in my mind, this is kind of a crude example of they're just starting to rise up on that pyramid. You know, I mean, they're still like, I mean, I'm sorry, but death is pretty much the punishment for everything. You know, I mean,
Well, and I think that was part of the reason for codes like this was because people got overly punished for infractions that they committed. And one of the things I'd always heard about the Code of Hammurabi was that it limited the amount of punishment that you could get. Now, if you poke somebody's eye out, you could have your eye poked out, but you couldn't, you know, they couldn't pull your tongue out too. You hadn't done that bad of a crime.
so they
So it
did
was
limit it.
the first attempt to kind of limit punishment as well as
That's fun. And-
codify it.
well, that is interesting that you say that because I went the opposite direction. It's like I think there's just so many infractions that have death.
Yeah.
As a, you know, so,
Well, yeah.
but I think you're right. You know, you think about, you know, how legalistic they were, and there were a lot of laws, you
Yeah.
know, so I think you're right that there's different levels then.
Well, and human beings were starting to live in larger and larger gatherings. When everybody was in a tribe, there was no need for codified
It's
laws. The
much
tribe
better.
just kind of
Yeah.
took care of it. But now people are living in cities and, you know, building these kingdoms and things. And so it's harder to control people.
Yeah.
And some of
without-
them were people from outside.
Yeah, so
And
you have
not
to
your,
have law
not your
to,
family.
you
Right.
know, to make people behave according to norms, whatever the norms were back then.
So Dempsey talks about the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And what's interesting to me about these books is that they kind of started that nationalistic, at least that we even have problems with today. You know, I mean, let me just be blunt,
Mhm.
because a lot of times, and it comes from that tribal viewpoint, but it was so nationalistic that it was just harsher legalisms. And so what the wisdom writers needed to do was come in and try to rebut some of this nationalism that was starting out in the Jewish culture, because all the cultures were doing. Once again, this is what happens when people kind of gather in groups, is my group's better than your group kind of a thing. And so the wisdom writers tried to come in and rebut some of these doubtful doctrines, is how Dempsey writes. So the first doubtful doctrine, and oh my gosh, we have not learned our lesson, have we? I'm telling you, Now we do not have to read these, but everybody kind of knows the term, the chosen people, don't we?
Yeah.
I mean, our church in particular knows this term but it's all over the Old Testament.
Yes.
It's all over what
Yeah.
the Jewish people still say today, I mean, well, we're the chosen people. This is our lot in life,
I kind of understand how that happened though, when they came back from Babylonian captivity.
Yes.
I mean, I'm not saying that was the path they
Yes.
should have chosen, but they
Yes.
were kind of going, okay, we're back. Who are we?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then
We are
all of a sudden
survivors.
They became.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure that was the right track, but
Well, and
they were wanting to identify themselves again.
Well, and I honestly, I grew up in the 60s when this was our concept in our church,
Mhm.
and it was the concept of, and I took it as a burden. I don't know what you guys thought of it, but I took it as a burden of, oh my gosh, we have 3 books that we need to follow, that doesn't make me necessarily superior, but it makes me part of this chosen people, that it's my job to go out and educate everybody about this extra knowledge that I have, but it's definitely in this same vein. I think our church now is getting away from the chosen people concept, that we should be the
Well,
ones.
Look at
that
the
are-
trouble it caused, the Mormon War.
Oh, yeah. Let's talk about that. It would have been interesting if Joseph Smith had actually become president. He tried. That would have been interesting, don't you think? So what Dempsey is telling us about is that there were these wisdom writers that came in and tried to explain, basically to rebut these doubtful doctrines, is how Dempsey called it. And so of course, now the first one is the book of Jonah, which is interesting how he tells us about the book of Jonah. What do you guys think? Truth, historical novel, allegory?
Allegory. Although I never thought of it that way until I read this chapter.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, no, I just thought it was
it's
not necessarily a true story, maybe historical fiction, but
yeah.
or a
I thought about that, I mean, we tell our kids these stories, and I just kind of wanted to ask the group, what is it that we should be saying to our children about these stories? Because they're great stories, they're great lessons. The lesson always should be a part of the story, and I know, where's Robin? Robin, are you here? No.
She's teaching.
Okay, well, there you go. I know that Robin always includes the lesson with these stories, but I do think children take things more literally,
sure, yeah.
Well,
and
they were
so,
really impressive when you were a kid.
I know, the whale,
The big
Well,
fish.
when you're 8 years old, the higher concept of allegorical literature is
Right.
probably beyond
yeah,
your ability. I don't know how you'd have to have somebody who's an expert in early childhood education come in and say, well, how do we present this? What's the right way to tell this story? We
right.
don't necessarily want to present it as historical fact if it's not. But we want the students to learn something. We want the kids to know that this is important in how we understand God or theology or.
So
Religion.
if we're telling the story with the lesson every time, we're already setting up that it's allegory. So when they're older, they can learn those concepts better.
You think?
Yeah.
I think you just
Go
tell
ahead.
them the way it is and, in the book and let it, then add the thing, well, that really shows you how you should do this and this and this.
Yeah, you're explaining the
But not
allegory,
telling them.
right?
I'd say it wasn't that way when I was a kid because you had a flannel graphic.
Oh, Lyra.
Here's Jonah, and here's the big whale.
Oh, yeah.
The whale eats Jonah, and nobody ever said, now what does that mean?
But in Native American teaching, sometimes they'll tell a story and they'll say something like, this is this story I'm going to tell you may not actually have happened this way, but I believe it's true, or something like that. Sure.
So well, yeah, they have something like that I've heard you say, but so to me, that means they believe the lesson,
Yeah,
Yeah,
but maybe not the historical, actual, factual detail.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah,
That's not real, but the lesson is true.
yeah,
when I taught Sunday school forever, there was always a lesson and then a story that
Illustrate.
supported that lesson. And children don't often think abstractly until they're 8 or so. Reasons for we not having them baptized
age,
until
age of
then.
reason, yeah,
So yeah, you have to be kind of careful how you
yeah.
But I think,
phrase it. do
but we're
it.
talking about children, we have a big problem with adults.
Oh, yeah. That's,
Well,
that's
because
kind
they
of, that's
were
kind of
taught a
the,
different way.
that's kind of, well, but
There were different methods of teaching back in the day, and it was,
Yeah.
this is how it is, and this is true.
Do
and
you ever
this is-
wonder though, if the people who wrote the book are smarter than we are because they understood it was allegorical?
that's what
They don't
Dempsey
really-
says. Dempsey said, yeah, Dempsey says, they were writing it because it was a time in Judah when the people in Judah need to understand this concept that you're not necessarily this chosen people. Jonah refused,
yeah. I always miss the point, the final point. I think, oh, he converted all these people. Isn't that wonderful? And then forget about the very end where he's upset and bitter. I
Mm.
think, why would he be upset about this? But it
Yeah,
wasn't
that's a good
explained
point.
Wasn't
nicely
he
in the
upset
book.
God killed his bush or something, a tree that he was sitting under? Yeah.
Well, but he created the tree in the first place to give him shade, and then the next day killed it.
Yeah.
But no, I
We
missed
need
the-
to read the book of Jonah again. That's the deal, because
know,
I
I
think
read-
you're right. I think we have this superficial concept of what the story was about. When if you and I think you can probably say that about all of these Old Testament stories. It's like we scratch the surface sometimes.
I know,
You
I had to
know.
go back and read the last chapter. Luckily, he's a short book. But I had to go back and read the last chapter. And went, oh,
So-
yeah, I
so-
did say that. And I do remember reading.
What is
it.
the lesson? What's the lesson of Jonah?
Basically that, okay, you may be the chosen people, but you're not the only people,
Okay.
or you're not the only people, period.
You're not the only people that God loves.
Yeah,
There you
Well,
go.
yeah, and Judaism was called to be an example for the rest of the world, and they forgot that.
yeah,
But in the, visions of, who was it, Hezekiah, where he talks about the river flowing from the temple, that was supposed to be the wisdom of God flowing out of the temple, not just for the Jews, but for the Gentiles as well. And that's supposedly is what Jonah was about, that a reminder to the Jews, hey, you're not the only ones here.
yeah.
Well, and remember that debate continued. We've studied a lot of early Christianity, and that's exactly what they were still trying to figure out, is who's entitled to be a Christian. Is it the Jews that followed Jesus, or are the Gentiles? Paul argued it in just about every letter that he wrote. There is no Jew, there is no Gentile, there is no woman, there is no man. That's my personal favorite, that one.
It makes me think of the commercial that's on right now, and it's a insurance commercial, and the gal's walking through the grocery store, and the guy's following behind her, and she says, so, you give me such this great deal? And he says, well, everybody gets that, and that has the insurance. And she says, even so-and-so that kept my bike in her garage for all those years, she gets it?
Yeah. This concept of we are special. We like that concept, don't we? I mean, we've had a lot of nationalism in the world, you know, I mean, you think of, during World War II and the isolationists,
Well,
you know, it took a
we
long,
won't do it again.
we are, but I'm just thinking, you
Yeah.
know, in terms of, it took us so long to get into the World War II because as a country, we said,
That's
you
your
know, doesn't
problem.
bother us, you know, they're not bothering us. And then, of course, they did by bombing Pearl Harbor, but, you know, I mean, it's just interesting that this theme comes up over and over again.
Well,
for
and I
us.
think it was the same way in World War One. We didn't get into it until the.
Yeah.
I believe.
So here's another doubtful doctrine that the wisdom writers addressed. Once again in Ezra, I don't know what, I was afraid by saying put away, does that mean they killed them? If
No, I
No,
think
they-
they just abandoned them.
they just
Yeah.
abandoned them,
Yeah,
so,
Yeah, they had, because they
Okay.
lived in Babylon for 60 years,
yeah,
they had integrated with the society and
Yeah.
probably a lot of them taken a
Babylon.
Babylonian spouse
yeah.
and had mixed children, you know, now they
Yeah.
were. So I think that was.
I need
what
to
talking
ask
about.
my Jewish friend at work whether it's still true, but well, you know, a lot of religions do this. Let's be blunt. I mean, how many religions do we have where it's like, well, if you don't marry in your own faith, then you're gonna have some problems, you know, and I know that that's a very strong sentiment in the Jewish faith over the years, you know.
Yes,
Kind of
but
was
it
in this
doesn't
church too.
keep.
I'm saying, that's what I'm saying. It
Yeah.
definitely was in this church too. I think
I
still
know,
is
my
for some
parents were
families.
upset when their great nephew married a Catholic.
Yeah.
Didn't they talk about people being weak in the faith if they married outside of?
Mhm.
But it's not
Yeah.
only in faith, it's also nationalities. You know, there's a lot of them that, you know, you're Italian, you've got to marry an Italian.
Yeah.
You're Asian, you got
Yeah.
to marry an
Yeah.
Asian.
Yeah.
Well, I was gonna say, when Harry Fleischer got married, there was a whole subject about Jewish men marrying Gentile women and
Ah.
the
Then
Jewish
the
women
children
were
are not gonna be Jewish, kind of
Yeah,
a thing.
well, but it was more that the Gentile women were taking away Jewish men for the Jewish women to marry,
Mhm,
something like that.
mhm. So Ruth then, the book of Ruth comes in then and talks about how a Gentile daughter-in-law is taking care of the widow. And so then the men are seeing the value of what someone outside of their faith. I know that's me. I think that's simplifying it way too much if you guys want to. But it's, I really love, I mean, I would love to read that book again too, you know, just to say, you know, Ruth was this example to them to say, wait a minute, you know, maybe there's value in someone outside of our faith, you know, because she left her own culture to come to take care of her mother-in-law. And that's something to be praised instead of, you know, so I kind of like that juxtaposition, you know, of, you know, there's this harsh law and then this woman comes in and just shows them that life is better than that, you know, life is more complicated than that, you know, so.
You know, religion has spent, well, not just religion, society in general, has spent way too much time figuring who's in and who's out.
Uh-huh.
You know, we want to divvy people up.
Mhm.
You're in the in group, you're outside. And,
Yeah.
you know, I think we gotta get over that.
And there, yeah, and when then there's this surprise, and sometimes it's this, you know, this, all she did was come in and take care of her mother-in-law, you know, I mean, she didn't come storming in with, you know,
Well,
causing
her
a war.
husband had died, so
Yeah.
She didn't leave,
No,
you know, she stayed in Moab, is that where they were?
yeah,
Yeah,
And
What?
took care of Naomi.
yeah,
well, and Naomi tried to send both the daughter-in-laws away or stay
Mhm.
where they were in their own, with their own families.
mm-hmm.
One of them did stay and Ruth said, no, where you go, I go, and
Yeah, isn't that sweet?
yeah,
I really like
I
her.
always liked her.
Yeah. I know I'm going fast, so you guys tell me if you want to stop and talk about doubtful doctrine more. There were 4.
Oh, well, this is out there today. We've got a whole bunch of preachers teaching the prosperity
Mhm.
gospel.
That's the
If you
prosperity
do everything
gospel.
right, you'll be rich.
Yeah,
And yeah,
No,
No.
And the secular version of that, just to jump in,
Mm-hmm.
the secular version of prosperity gospel is the law of attraction,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
that you can invite the universe to bend to your will.
Oh, our entire society is all about reward and, prosper. It all, the great prosper.
I think that's why a lot of countries hate us. Because of that.
I don't know. I don't know. So, okay, Ryan, here's your book. Book of Job. Book of Job. I did not know we were gonna get into this yet, so you get to say how much you love it, and I get to say, well, maybe. So I will have to say that Dempsey has an interesting take on this. All right, so
Okay.
Job obviously shows that, he was a good man, but he suffered many setbacks in life,
yeah. We're gonna get to the question. Here's what Dempsey says. I know I'm jumping to the lesson. All right. And so you guys tell me what you think the lesson is, but here's what Dempsey says. The central message of Job seems to be that when reconciling a just God with a world of massive evil, the best way to deal with the problem is to not deal with it.
Let God and let go.
Really? That's the lesson of Job? I don't know. I'm just gonna throw my hands up in the air.
Well, I don't know, I've never taken it that way, but I do think that we live in a time where we think we can fix everything.
Yeah.
And some things are out of your control.
Well,
Now,
okay,
some things
okay.
you have influence on and can make better, but some things are just beyond your ability to change.
And what do they say now? They say if you have a problem coming at you, if you just leave it alone,
Mhm.
naturally in about 3 to 4 days, it's gonna work itself out anyway. And I mean, the smaller day-to-day like problems.
Yeah.
But not the big things. But I'm just saying, sometimes we try too hard to fix things and we make it worse.
Well, there is
Well, I
a
always do.
saying that kind of goes that people are they've worried about too many things that did not come to pass.
Mhm.
I'm not sure I agree with, don't deal with your problems,
Yeah.
but don't worry about things
I certainly,
that may not ever develop.
well, and I certainly agree with don't blame God for everything, for the massive evil in the world. But okay, Ryan, you got to correct me here because in my mind, the book of Job is about God and Satan joining up
Playing the game.
to
Yeah.
to
Playing a
play, to
chess game.
test Job. It's like, why would God do that? That's my question. I don't think that's what the lesson should be from Job, but that's how I read it. Am I wrong?
Well, I think what he's saying, what Dempsey is saying is that the greater question, I'm going to reword it a little bit because I don't think he's entirely clear, but it's what I think he's saying
Yeah.
is if you have a loving God, how do you have suffering in the world?
Well, sure.
So, people I've heard this rationalized out many different ways. We have a God who is all powerful, can do anything God wants,
Mhm.
and as a loving God, loves creation, then
Mhm.
why do we have suffering? So the two alternate choices are either God chooses to do nothing, which I think is the book of Job, in my estimation. Job is saying, well, God isn't going to go fix everything. Sometimes I just got to bear it for a while and hope for something better. Or God is not all powerful. And those are the people that go down that pathway, probably choose to become agnostics or atheists.
Yeah.
And so I think when he says the problem is not to deal with it, is we get caught up in a lot of that. We can spend all of our trying to rationalize and figure out what's going on rather than what Job did, which is, I just accept this is life. Sometimes it's up, sometimes it's down. It wasn't really God that was punishing Job. God in the story allows Satan or the tempter, whoever that was at that time in their belief system, to deal with Job and make him miserable. But in the end, it all worked out. He got back everything. He got his family back, not the same
I
family,
was
but a
gonna
new
say,
family.
you have to question, does having a new family replace the old?
Well,
family?
that's another
So-
question of Job. If you get
All
to
worked
think about
out.
that is, well, didn't he miss his first family? Well, yeah, he probably did, but
Well,
At
of
least,
course he
at
did.
least, the moral is, I mean, apart from all of those little side issues that we can get lost in, the moral is that sometimes life is bad, sometimes life is gonna be better, and we shouldn't
Wait.
give up hope.
I want Ryan to jump in. He's behind me and I'm assuming he wants to talk. Ryan?
Oh, well, if you think that I've figured out the key to solve the mystery of
No,
Job,
No,
no,
no.
I have definitely not.
But what appeals to you about this? What is it? What is the lesson for you, I guess, is my question? Because I'm trying to change my viewpoint of God's not trying to be active in it. I think that's the part that I need to change a little bit. He
Right.
didn't actively join Satan. He just stepped back and
Well,
let
Just, he
Satan.
lets
I
it.
think a little bit of the mystery of Job is, what I was gonna say is, when you have the knowledge of what's going on in the heavenly realm, it does undermine a little bit of the takeaway message, but, with Satan testing,
Hmm.
but, I think it's putting Job in his place, and the friends, because the friends are trying to console him and are giving him what could be sensible answers, but.
Well, his friends were blaming the victim, though.
Yeah,
They were saying you must have been sinful, and that's why all
Yes.
this happened to you. And Job kind of refused to believe that.
Right.
Because Job was the
And-
righteous man.
And from what I understand is the friends and their wisdom was a parallel to the like the wisdom of Proverbs.
Yeah,
So
okay.
I find the book of Job, and I haven't read this chapter to see what Dempsey says explicitly, but that Job is in some ways a critique of the wisdom of Proverbs and the karma,
Mhm.
what you reap is what you sow.
Mhm. Yeah,
You do good, you'll get good. You do
Right.
bad, you get bad.
right.
And
That's
Job
it.
is saying, basically, sometimes bad things happen to good people.
Right, yeah, that's
Yeah,
right,
and
that's
that's what-
exactly.
What I was wondering, not just this, I haven't developed this thought, so it might have a hole in it, but, what if the story of happens that Job had all these bad things happening, and in that time, believing that God's messed with people's lives, well, if it wasn't God that caused it, then who did cause it? And so then you have this other person, this other being that they called the tempter, the Satan. Whereas really, it was just bad things happen sometimes and they're trying to put the blame on somebody. And so,
Well, and I think we can't forget the great lesson of Job, which is Job 19:25 through 27.
Okay,
For I know that my Redeemer lives, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and mine eye shall behold, and not another. And though my reins be consumed within me. So there's a tremendous testimony of faith, I think, and trust that Job had in God, that no matter how bad things were now, he still believed that
he lost
he would see
everything
he lost everything.
and he still
Well,
believed.
and
Yeah.
I was gonna say, to me, the point was that during that time, if you were good, you got rewarded. If you were bad, you got punished.
Mhm.
And I think this refutes that,
Mhm.
that you don't necessarily always get rewarded, and the people who are wrong don't always get punished.
Right,
And this is just sort of
yeah.
how that works
Job
out.
definitely comes out as the hero, I mean, it's
Well,
just,
except that he also gets kind of scolded by God because I can't even kind of remember how that is,
He was
but
kind of slipping just a tiny bit there for.
well, both he and his friends were not actually right.
And you can understand, I mean, they're
Scared.
all sympathetic characters. We can relate to them. And I don't have the patience of Job. That's an expression, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd be cursing God, but I might be cursing.
But even his wife
I
told him
know
to
I would
curse
be.
God and die.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. All right.
By the way, I take it all as allegory, but
Yeah.
that doesn't mean it doesn't have a lot of truth to it.
Absolutely. Yeah,
Kind of
absolutely.
like Jonah.
Yeah.
you know.
We need to study the book of
There's a
Job
lesson
sometime,
there.
Jack.
It's just
As
exhausting
painful
to
as this
me.
would be for you.
I like Jonah and Ruth and Job. That would be
Well,
fun.
wasn't the wisdom literature on our list? of
Yes.
books?
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, it's like a fourth book that we're gonna
Yeah,
read.
so we'll get.
All
there.
right, we're gonna get there. All right, so back to Samaria. I actually remember being fascinated as a child with Samaria. You know, I mean, this is, you guys remember the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, you know, and all that in our studies.
That was our earliest ancient story.
Exactly. Well, and what's really amazing to me, you know, reading how Dempsey's looking at this is that both the creation story and the flood story, these stories are in just about every culture
Yeah.
and every religion.
Yeah,
Okay.
Cradle of civilization.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
it,
they started in Sumeria. You know, so the Sumerians, you got to think about all these people. And once again, remember, we're talking about this is wisdom. And so they're making assumptions about nature of what they are observing. But, you know, they don't have the scientific methods that we have now. So in their mind, why my favorite in this book was Dempsey going, well, they're all saying, why is it raining? Oh, well, there must be a ocean up above. You know, there's a freshwater ocean up above and a saltwater ocean below. And then there's this firmament in the middle.
That
And
separates.
that's the sky that's holding it together.
it looked like a big
Windows
snow
thing.
globe.
Yeah, a big snow globe.
They
There's
have
a there's
windows
a
open.
diagram of it in the book,
Yeah.
you guys, if you want to look, but
On
so-
page 51.
page 51. And
That's
so
not the way it is.
what's
And
interesting,
yet in here is the.
what's
firmament, and
interesting
they-
about the flood stories is that they started in Sumeria because it was the Sumerians that figured out how to drain the swamps and how to tame the water to create these city states and have dry land. And so that flood story became really important for that culture. Well, and then of course, remember the wisdom stories went everywhere. And I have wondered why we've got Noah sitting there in an area of the world where it's pretty much dry all the time. And then the flood story comes in as, you know, once again, allegory versus truth. A lot of people are still looking for Noah's Ark. I know that, you know, but in terms of allegory, it makes more sense to me that it's really about, you know, kind of, once again, the Old Testament puts God in the center of the stories, you know, hang on, I'll go to Noah's story recognizes that God is at the center of the flood event. Because if you look at the old stories, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, that's the old Sumerian story. The god, there were multiple gods for one thing, and then the only people who survived were like the one particular heroes, which that's kind of who Noah was, the righteous man, remember? But in the old stories, you know, the flood's going to happen again. And the main difference in the Genesis story is that God promises no more flood. So that becomes this God that is not only powerful, but he's also good. And, you know, he is saying to them, I'm not going to do this again. But their world was a watery chaos. You think about, you know, where these cultures were, you know, in terms of time, and the Sumerians conquered the watery chaos. And so that became a very epic story to create throughout cultures, you know? And it's like, to me, it's kind of fascinating that that's where the flood story began. That was new for me.
Well, and I always thought firmament was the earth, not this.
That's
big
right.
metal
Yeah, it's kind of
thing.
hard to,
Is
it's the
sky.
sky.
Stars and.
So here's their universal assumptions, which none of them are actually true. You know, the earth is the universe. center of the earth, everybody, I mean, we had that for a very long term. Earth is immovable, and I read, he said that the earthquakes proved it, because it's somebody trying to move the earth, but it still stays intact. The earth is flat, and then the sky is this strong, rigid bowl. And this is strong like metal with reflective surface, and that's where the word firmament comes in. That the I think it's the Hebrew word for firmament, meant shiny, hard surface. So,
I don't remember.
so you guys, do we have an answer of why the flood story needed to be in Genesis? Why was it there? Let's just say it's not literal. We're just going to make the assumption that it's allegory. Why did they need it in the Old Testament?
It's an allegory of listening to God and being close to God and
Okay,
paying attention.
of God's going to take care of us, kind of a thing.
Well, and it feeds into the in those times, some gods were capricious.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know where Israel was in their concept of God at the time the story of Noah was written down.
Yeah,
But, the gods could get angry and withhold the rain or
right.
kill all your cattle or
Yeah,
whatever. And to me, the Noah story is kind of like that. God's gonna flood the boat.
yeah.
But I'll save you if you build a boat.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they have the view of God quite right yet.
No,
But they do show Noah trying to follow God.
yeah.
If he can figure out what that is.
Well, and the rest of them had become so evil, God had to start over again.
Yeah.
Kind of like, really?
Yeah.
Did you
Which was-
screw up that badly in the
Well, and he
first
didn't-
creation? I'm thinking.
Sometimes I wonder if we try to give the ancient writers too much credit. Maybe they believed some of this stuff. Maybe they didn't think it was
Well,
allegory.
I'm sure they had some big, huge flood. There's no doubt in my mind there was this huge rainstorm that scared them to death. I mean, that's part of what we're talking about here.
Tsunamis.
Yeah, I mean, you think about the horrible storms that come up, and just like Sharon was saying earlier, I mean, if God, whether they believe in one God or more than one God, if God is causing this, then they need to appease him somehow. So this is a story about a righteous man that gathered his people, in 2x2 animals, and was saving that's the Jonah story. That's
Right.
That's the
Yeah.
Job story.
Mhm.
It's like, this is man's reaction to what God is doing to us. But I do think the difference in the Genesis story is that God promises never to do it again. And that's new. That's not what the capricious
God. usually
multiple
do.
gods would normally
He said,
do.
okay, I'm okay for a little while.
Yeah.
You do it.
Yeah, it's like, you've learned your lesson, be like Noah or something, I mean, I think these stories served that group of people to say, here's what God is asking you to be like Noah,
Right.
or
Except
try.
Noah get drunk after he got off the ark, and
Yeah,
there's some bad stuff there.
Yeah.
He wasn't.
Well, he is a
I don't
man,
quite like
he's a
that.
man. I don't remember, does he get drunk?
Talk
You,
about-
how would you like being shut up with all those animals for 40 days?
I don't remember if he specifically got punished for that, but there was some bad
Well,
behaviors.
Well, he was on the boat a long time.
That's
you
what I
know.
said.
40 days.
I think, there's an implication here too, that in the Noah story, that God is trying to shape the earth the way God wants the earth to be. So we'll
Yeah.
get rid of all the bad stuff and start over.
Yeah,
And,
And
I
then
can
there's
remember
sin again.
for years being told that, God is active in every single thing
Yeah.
that happens on the face of the earth, and
Yeah.
you can't get away from it. And if God wants to destroy it, God will destroy it. If God wants
Yeah.
to preserve it, God will preserve it.
yeah,
I think, I don't know.
Well, and he didn't say that he'd flood, he would never flood again. He just said he wouldn't flood like
The entire.
clean
Not
sweep.
that bad, yeah,
And,
that's right.
you know, the rainbow was not an expression that this will never happen again. It was that I will be with you forever.
Oh, yeah, it's true,
So,
yeah.
you know, it's, I see maybe.
But it's
in that, there it
the,
is. You guys make it work it out.
work it out.
Work it out.
Well, you know, you can go to western Kansas and find shark's teeth. My brother has.
Well,
done
yeah,
that.
because this used to be underwater.
Yeah, and parts of the places that are deserts now
Yeah,
used to be quite green and.
well, yeah, that's where we have the concept of the world started in watery chaos, you know, I mean, and the Sumerians were the ones that was closest to it, you know, in time, let's just say it that way,
Well,
you know,
Australia, and
yeah. The what?
Australians.
Well, whatever, yeah, you're right,
Tectonic plates and all
Yeah.
that. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Science will come up.
okay.
Kind of change things around.
Let's just say in,
Sumerians-
religious terms,
Yeah.
you know,
Well,
in
let's-
society.
That's probably how a lot of these stories came about, you know, you can imagine, 2000 BC, if you were somebody who wanted to record what you thought about the earth and you live in Larned, Kansas and found a shark's tooth. How do I explain this? Well, I've got to have a reason for that. There must have been a flood
Mhm, mhm.
that brought the sharks to Kansas.
Or a sharknado.
Or Sharknado.
Well, and there was. It wasn't a
That's
flood,
not
it
till the
was-
New
Yeah.
Testament.
But all of this brings up for me why there's such a debate still on how to interpret the Bible, and I think
Yes.
people aren't acknowledging that the Old Testament writers had a totally different cosmology than we have today.
Yeah,
So obviously they're gonna look at things differently
yeah,
and
Well-
attribute cause and effect differently.
yeah,
You know, and I think even in my lifetime, I feel like I need a new cosmology because the Hubble telescope and the Webb telescope, my gosh. We're just
Changing it over and over.
discovering the immensity of the creation. And I'm
Yeah.
like, whoa.
yeah,
But we did have, I mean, back in those times, as it got moving. There were scientists and there were mathematicians and there were astronomers and they were figuring those kind of things
they were
out.
working on
But
it.
then there was still, you know, what do we do all evening? Because we don't have TV and we don't have movies and we don't have Xbox and all that. We tell stories and we try to explain things,
Mhm.
you know, and.
storytelling
and
was their television.
storytelling, and it was,
Yeah.
history wasn't written down, it was told and it was repeated.
Mhm.
And you think about the old game of telephone. If Dennis starts it and gets to Joyce, it's not going to be the same thing.
Right.
So, you know, things get a little twisted around before it gets on paper.
Well, but I also think that our knowledge today makes you really question if we're the most important thing in the universe or not. I mean, there are universes. You know,
Wouldn't that-
they're
Wouldn't that blow our
Very
minds
hard
if, you know,
fit
some,
in. I mean, I'm like, wow, we
All
are a
of it's-
speck.
Yeah.
And the immensity of stars and planets
Yeah.
and universes and galaxies and whatnot. I
I know.
trouble
it would
figuring
blow our
out.
minds if somebody showed up, you know, and said, you know, we've been watching you for
Yeah.
300 years, you know, here's
That's
here's something
idiots
new
on-
for you to be better. Well, you guys, all right, hello. Re-
It
re-
made me think of a name. but
Rem-
it's trying to-
Yeah, remember that, and you know, I had to go back and look at this. Genesis has 2 creation stories,
Yeah, please.
you know, and so when you're looking at, they're 600 years apart. And, you know, one of them has this firmament concept. And this is where, you know, we put in that God is the creator. You know, he's the center of it. He's noble, wise, purposeful. And
As you get away from the Middle East, creation stories change.
yeah, there were
Yeah.
You know.
it's pretty cool when you go and study the creation
know.
stories from a lot of people. I mean, remember it's multiple gods too, and Genesis 2 is still looking at God as anthropomorphic, and so that's this God that is got all of these human.
Yeah.
Elements.
Human.
But then Genesis 1, which is the one we all quote more than anything else, then that's when we have this power of the word, this logos word, you know. And that was the influence of these Greek philosophers. When you think about Greek philosophy is kind of coming along the same time, and that's all that secular, and early Christianity, remember, when we're studying that, it had all kinds of influences from the secular philosophers,
I want
Dennis?
to read about, just a little bit, this is, written by an Indian who was also an Episcopal bishop one time, but
That Indian meaning Native American.
Native American.
Mm-hmm,
He's writing about the Hopi tribe down in Southwest
mm-hmm,
US. He was talking about their creation story. And he says, in their story, there was endless space. And this void was and in this void was a single consciousness, which I kind of like that word,
mm-hmm,
for a different word for God.
mm-hmm,
Consciousness, God, the Tawa, the creator. Tawa considered the emptiness of space and had a thought. Creation therefore began not with a word, but with an idea.
I didn't realize.
The thought precedes the word as the idea precedes the action. I thought that was interesting.
Read that last part again, or say that last sentence again.
The thought precedes the word.
There you go.
Precedes the
The action.
Okay. This is the power, this is
just read
the power of the word. I like
The
that.
thought precedes the word as the idea precedes the action.
Yeah. And that's when this logos thing, that's the same as this logos concept, the person's name had power, to the force of the word itself. I mean, you think of the Genesis story where Jacob tricked Isaac into a blessing because he gave him the wrong name, and Isaac is very upset about that. And then John, the book of John is all about the power of the word. Christ is now the word, and so when you go back and look at the Genesis story, honestly, I'm pretty sure that's what Joseph Smith did. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but Joseph Smith went back to Genesis and put Jesus there because it says in the beginning was the word.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I right? That's pretty much what he was thinking of. So if the word is
That's a common interpretation.
you think that's what he was doing? You think Joseph was doing that?
Is, I'd have to look back. Is that in the inspired version?
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm.
Okay.
So I mean that I'm just kind of thinking in terms of what that concept of the word means. It's so powerful,
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Yeah, I'd have to rethink some things, because I hadn't thought about the Greek influence.
Yeah.
But it was definitely.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There, and I know that Plato believed that every idea had or every concept had, I don't know if it had a physical
Kind of that shadow.
yeah,
Concept.
that I'd have to study
Okay.
some philosophy.
Yeah. So let me just kind of jump through this stuff. This is this legacy of wisdom learning. So the positives are sage advice still applies to life issues. That's why people love Proverbs and parts of the Psalms and the Job story. This is wisdom for us. And it's good for us to look at, take philosophical outlooks that ennoble this thinking of unity.
Share my happy moment in this chapter.
Okay.
I love from Proverbs when it said, "Let your foot be seldom in your neighbor's house, lest he become weary of you."
That applies.
I didn't remember that. because
That
I
applies
thought,
today.
"Yeah, wisdom
That's
for
right. That's right. But of course, Dempsey points out we have some problems, and like you said, Sharon, we're still debating the design of the world because there's some people, I know that the Jehovah's Witnesses tried to convince me how old the world was because this is exactly what the Bible says, and I do think that we've got to think about that. What is the flood story? Dempsey says, is it superstitious nonsense? And we have to question then there are influences from other writings. Does that bother us that our Bible isn't, just purely God saying to those people, this is what I want you to do? It actually is human beings getting their writings perhaps from other influences, from these stories that they've heard, from, ancient Sumeria. It makes more sense to me that these are human beings trying to figure out God. That's what the Bible is. Versus, word for word, God is saying exactly what he wants us to say. So here's Dempsey's final thoughts. Use the wisdom portions of Bible with caution. They represent the best attempt of humanity at that time to make sense of the world as they understood it. They are not inspired truth. Some writing was profoundly wise. Some was profoundly wrong. He's blunt, isn't he? Each passage needs to be evaluated on its merits before deciding how to treat it. I think that's fair to say. So I got a lot of questions that I hope that I asked most of them during our talk.